They said the cries from the lower quarters didn't sound human anymore. Not screams, calls. As if the voices below the magnolia trees were summoning something back, something that once had a name, but not a soul. In 1860, Louisiana, the plantation called Marrow Bend stood like a wound that refused to close. Its owner, Elijah Thornwell, wasn't remembered for cotton or cane, but for the bloodlines he bred like cattle, through his own daughters. This is not a myth. This is not the madness of rumor. This is the archive they tried to burn, the one that still smells of smoke when you open it. Imagine standing at the edge of a swamp at midnight, the air so thick it's hard to tell if you're breathing or drowning. That's what it felt like for the people trapped on Thornwell's land. He didn't believe in heaven or mercy, only legacy. He wanted a pure strain, something eternal and loyal, something that would serve forever. And to do it, he turned his daughters, Miriam, Celine, and Rose, into breeders, not wives, not women, instruments. His journals describe them as vessels of continuation. Those words, written in his own hand, found decades later inside a Bible, smeared with what appeared to be rust. But rust doesn't soak through paper like that. The neighbors never spoke his name in daylight. At night, though, they whispered about the sound, a single bell that rang from the old oak yard whenever one of the daughters conceived. A signal, a ritual. Some said it wasn't just for record-keeping. It was to call something else. Tonight, you'll hear what they heard. You'll see how power, isolation, and madness merged into something that still stains the soil of that land. Because this story, what happened at Marrow Bend, isn't just about one man's corruption. It's about how darkness disguises itself as divine order, and how, even now, its descendants walk among us, crying bloodlines designed for obedience. Once you hear what he built, you'll never see heritage the same way again. They say evil never announces itself. It seeps like humidity until the air is too thick to breathe, and no one remembers what clean feels like. That was Marrow Bend by the summer of 1860. The plantation looked like a painting. White columns, blue shutters, oak trees draped in Spanish moss. But behind the symmetry, something unspeakable grew, something that made the land whisper even after it rained. Elijah Thornwell was a man raised on two ideas, property and providence. He believed both could be owned, shaped, and controlled, including the souls of his own blood. The man had once studied theology at a seminary in Charleston, but was expelled after claiming he'd found a purer design for man's hierarchy. He returned to Louisiana with the conviction that God had created him to improve humanity, starting with his own lineage. His daughters were his first subjects. Miriam, the eldest, barely 20, carried herself like she knew she was trapped inside a sermon she didn't believe in. Celine was quieter. She painted the fields, painted faces, painted cages. Rose was the youngest, barely 16, and still believed her father's words were holy. They didn't understand, not at first, what the rituals were for. Elijah called them unions of perfection. He said they were chosen, blessed. The house staff knew better. They'd seen what happened in the barns. They'd heard the prayers twisted into commands. When the first daughter was found pregnant, the overseer quit without notice, muttering something about unnatural gods walking the grounds. Thornwell's reasoning was meticulous. He wrote in his journals that slavery is not bondage of the body, but correction of the weak. He believed he could create a generation immune to rebellion, children bred from obedience and divine blood, raised to believe servitude was sacred. His daughters weren't mothers. They were conduits. One night, a midwife described what she saw during one of these unions. She said the master drew chalk symbols across the barn floor, symbols older than any scripture she knew. He spoke in tongues that weren't English or Latin. He said he was aligning blood with design. When she refused to assist again, her body was found in the swamp 2 days later, her tongue missing, her hands folded over her stomach, as if in prayer. The locals said the swamp took her, but those who lived on the land knew better. Nothing ever really left Marrow Bend. Because that night the bell rang again, and this time it didn't stop. They said the first child was born under a blood-red moon, the kind that makes dogs howl and horses refuse to breathe. The year was 1861. The war was coming, but no one in Marrow Bend cared. Their war had already begun. When Miriam's labor began, the house shook. The servants swore they heard footsteps in the attic, heavy, dragging ones, pacing above her screams. The windows rattled without wind. Even the river outside swelled up and broke its banks, flooding the road like something was trying to reach them. The child came silent. No cry, no gasp. For a full minute, everyone thought it was stillborn. But then, its eyes opened. Blue, so pale they almost looked white. Elijah fell to his knees. He said, "The mark of the design." He named the boy Abel, claiming it was the name of the first obedient soul. Abel didn't cry as a baby, didn't babble, didn't laugh. He just stared, for hours, at corners of rooms no one else looked at. The slaves called him the mirror child. Some said he reflected back what you feared most. A few swore they saw him standing in their quarters at night, even though he was locked in his cradle upstairs. By the time he was 3, 3 more children had been born, each from a different daughter. None had fathers the world could acknowledge. All had the same eyes. All carried the same unblinking calm, the same silence. The air in the house began to rot. Candles wouldn't stay lit. Food spoiled overnight. Crows gathered on the roof in flocks that never left. One of the maids, Ruth, finally broke. She snuck into the nursery one night to steal the children away, to bring them across the river to a safe house. She never made it past the gate. In the morning, they found her, or rather, what was left of her. Her body was twisted in a way no human bones could allow. The children were sitting nearby, unharmed, watching. Abel had a piece of her down, Ress in his hand. Elijah wrote that it was proof that his design worked, that the spirit of rebellion had been removed. He started calling the children seraphim, his angelic race of perfected servants. But those who worked under him saw something else. The children didn't age right. Their reflections lagged in mirrors. One was seen talking to someone invisible in the corner of her room. Another was caught standing in the field, staring straight at the sun for an hour, without blinking. And then one night, as thunder rolled over the bayou, Miriam, the eldest daughter, took a lantern and walked into the swamp. She was never seen again. Some say she drowned. Others say she finally met the thing her father had summoned, and traded her silence for freedom. By the summer of 1862, Marrow Bend had stopped pretending to be a plantation. The crops had withered, the fields gone to bone-white dust, and still Elijah Thornwell refused to leave. He said the land was transforming, that what others called decay was the shedding of the old order. His journals became sermons, long, fevered scriptures about ascension through blood. He wrote, The old world burns, but the new one is being born beneath my house. The servants had all either fled or vanished by then. Those who stayed behind, the ones too terrified or too broken to run, whispered that the house itself had changed. Doors opened to rooms that weren't there before. Footsteps echoed where no one walked. At night, the windows glowed faintly from within, even when the candles had long gone out. The children roamed freely now, 5 of them, all silent, all pale, all moving as if they shared a single heartbeat. The youngest would hum in a low tone that made the walls tremble. And wherever they walked, insects died. Elijah called it the purification. He believed he'd created vessels not just of obedience, but of divine resonance. Children who hear God's true frequency. He recorded their hums on scraps of parchment, trying to transcribe their patterns into words. But the words he wrote didn't look like English. Some didn't look human at all. Then one night, the youngest daughter, Rose, still barely 18, entered his study while he was writing. She told him she dreamed of Miriam standing in the swamp, holding something that looked like a child made of smoke. She said Miriam whispered, "Father's design is not heaven's, it's hell's." Elijah slapped her, but his hand trembled when he did. Something in him was beginning to crack. He started locking himself in the attic for days, refusing food, muttering that he had to tune the blood. The children began drawing symbols on the walls in ash, circles within circles, eyes, keys. The few workers who remained said the house made sounds at night, deep, grinding ones, like the earth shifting its teeth. And once they saw a figure standing by the gate, a woman in white, barefoot, dripping swamp water. The dogs wouldn't go near her. A week later, Rose's body was found hanging from the rafters in the old barn, her stomach cut open, her insides carved with the same symbols the children had been drawing. Elijah didn't cry. He just stood there, whispering. The vessel was too weak. From that moment on, something in the house came alive. The bells began ringing without touch. The walls wept a dark fluid that stained anything it touched. The air itself felt heavier, as if the house was breathing, waiting. That was when the neighbors stopped coming near Marrow Bend altogether. But it was too late, because what Elijah had summoned had already learned to walk. By the fall of 1862, Marrow Bend was no longer spoken of as a place. It had become a warning. Travelers on the old Baton Rouge Road said you could see lights floating through the trees at night, not lanterns, but pale orbs drifting low to the ground, pulsing like living things. No one went near them. Those who did were found wandering days later, blind and whispering the same phrase over and over. He built a gate of blood. Inside the house, the children, the so-called seraphim, had taken control. Elijah Thornwell wasn't master anymore. He'd become something else, an instrument of his own creation. The servants who hid in the cellar heard him speaking in 2 voices, one his own, the other deeper, hollow, like it came from the bottom of the well. He called out to the children not by their names, but by numbers. First, second, third, as if he couldn't remember what he'd named them. They didn't answer with words, only the hum, that same low resonance that made the walls vibrate, the same sound the midwife had once heard during the ritual. But now it had form. You could feel it pressing against your ribs when they began, a sound that made glass crack and metal twist. One night, a neighbor's son, just 14, wandered into the property, dared by friends to touch the haunted fence. They found his body the next morning near the chapel, folded backward at the spine, eyes burned white. The coroner said his heart had ruptured from the inside. Elijah's journal from that day reads only one sentence: "The angels have chosen their first offering." The Civil War thundered all around them, but no soldiers ever crossed onto the property. Scouts claimed their compasses spun wildly near the gate. Others said the air smelled like ozone and rot, even when the wind was still. Something in that soil rejected the living. And then came the night. Elijah gathered the sea. Hildren in the great hall, what used to be a place of dinner and scripture, now turned into an altar. He spoke to them about final alignment, about merging the divine and the mortal, about birthing a kingdom within flesh. The youngest child, the one they called Fifth, stepped forward and placed his small hand on Elijah's chest. The house went silent. Every candle died at once. And when light returned, Elijah was on his knees, eyes empty, mouth open, in a frozen scream. His skin had turned pale as ash. He was still breathing, but there was nothing behind the breath. The children walked away, calm, hands clasped like saints. After that night, the hum never stopped. It filled the plantation day and night, deep enough to shake the swamp water. No one dared approach again, but from miles away, people said they could still hear it, the sound of something new being born. By 1863, Marrow Bend had become a scar the map refused to acknowledge. Cartographers redrew the region again and again, erasing the property, shrinking the river bend, pretending the land didn't exist. But those who lived nearby could still feel it, the vibration beneath the soil, the pulse that wouldn't stop. The hum had grown louder. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was pressure. Birds fell dead mid-flight when they crossed above the estate. Horses refused to ride past its gates. Even the trees began leaning away from the house, as if repelled by whatever force was coiled inside. The few who survived and fled spoke in fragments, words that made no sense, or maybe too much sense. They said the children no longer ate, no longer slept. They stood in the fields, heads tilted upward, mouths open, as if tasting invisible rain. One described seeing faces in the clouds above the plantation, not shapes or shadows, but faces, hundreds of them, staring down as if waiting to be born again. And in the swamps beyond the property, something new was happening. The water had turned black, not murky, black like ink. Fishermen pulling up their nets found fish without eyes. Alligators surfaced with scars that glowed faintly in the dark. The hum wasn't confined anymore. It was radiating outward, through roots, through mud, through blood. Meanwhile, the Confederate scouts who ventured near reported strange readings on their compasses and watches that stopped ticking entirely. Some soldiers claimed to hear whispering voices saying, "Follow the frequency." Those who did were never seen again. The legend grew that Elijah Thornwell hadn't just wanted to create obedience. He wanted to create transmission, a living code passed through flesh. The seraphim weren't his children anymore. They were transmitters, conduits for something older, something waiting to be rewritten into human DNA. In 1864, a traveling preacher named Silas Greer made his way to the parish. He claimed he could drive out the curse. He gathered a group of locals, crossed the river at midnight, and carried torches up to the Thornwell gate. That night, the sky turned the color of copper. Their torches blew out one by one. Only one man returned, blind, shaking, and covered in soot. His hair had turned completely white. All he said over and over was, "It's not a place anymore. It's a mouth." After that night, no one approached Marrowbend again. The swamp reclaimed it, inch by inch. The records stopped. The family name was erased from Louisiana's census. The house, people said, sank slowly into the ground. But the hum kept going. Some nights, even now, locals swear they can hear it, far off, beneath the static of the bayou air. A sound that doesn't belong to nature. A sound like breathing. For more than a century, Marrowbend slept beneath the water, or so people thought. Time forgot it, the river rewrote it, and memory turned it into a ghost story. But ghosts don't leave evidence. This one did. In 1987, a team of geological surveyors were sent to map the bayou for a new pipeline route. They found something that shouldn't have been there. A pulse. The instruments picked it up first. A low-frequency vibration, repeating every 41 seconds. It wasn't machinery. It wasn't seismic. It was alive. The team marked it as an anomaly. But one of them, Dr. Aaron Lind, couldn't let it go. He started digging into parish records, reading old Confederate correspondences, archived newspapers. That's when he found the Thornwell name, the plantation that had vanished without trace. The more he read, the stranger it got. Thornwell's journals were believed lost, but 3 were preserved in a private collection at Tulane University. They were water-damaged, written in a fevered scrawl, but a few lines were still legible. One read, "The flesh is a vessel. The word must become blood to endure the flood." Another, "My children hum the tone of heaven. I have aligned the frequencies. The gate listens." Lynn brought a team of graduate students out to the site, armed with sonar, recorders, and curiosity. The swamp was quiet. Too quiet. The frogs had stopped croaking, the air felt compressed, and the mud trembled beneath their boots like something alive. Then they found it, the top of a chimney rising from the black water. Beneath it, sonar showed a perfect rectangular outline buried deep under the sediment. The plantation hadn't been destroyed. It had sunk. When Lind lowered a hydrophone into the water, the speakers emitted a sound that made every person in the camp feel nauseous. A low, rhythmic hum pulsing like a heartbeat. The same 41-second interval. They thought it was mechanical resonance, until one of the students began humming it back, unconsciously. When they stopped, she didn't. That night, she disappeared. They found her 2 days later, half submerged in the mud, eyes open, mouth still moving, repeating the same vibration like a mantra. Lynn's report was seized before publication. The official reason: biological contamination risk. But fragments leaked. A technician who reviewed the recordings noticed something, hidden under the hum, a modulation pattern. When the data was converted to spectrogram form, it wasn't random. It formed shapes, letters. The same symbols burned into the walls of the Thornwell house in 1862. The message, when translated phonetically, repeated a single line. The design still breathes. And from that day on, the hum began spreading again, over shortwave frequencies, into white noise, into the static between radio stations. Men listening late at night swore they could hear it under the signal, faint, but there. Some claim if you hum it twice, it doesn't stop when you do. By 1989, the hum had evolved. It was no longer just sound. It was contagion. The recordings Dr. Lin's team captured began circulating among fringe academics, paranormal researchers, and military analysts. They all reported the same phenomenon. Prolonged exposure altered the listener's heartbeat, syncing it to the hum's 41-second rhythm. After a while, the rhythm stayed, even when the recording stopped. Lind vanished 3 months after his discovery. His wife found his study torn apart, walls covered in sketches of concentric circles, each labeled with strange notations: phase gates, blood frequencies, corruption of signal. The last thing he wrote was a note to himself: "The sound isn't from the swamp is from the sound." Then he drew a crude map of Louisiana, and a network of lines spreading outward, branching like veins. Across the South, reports began surfacing. Small towns near Baton Rouge and Lafayette describing phantom noises, livestock collapsing overnight, families waking up to find their clocks frozen at 3:09 a.m. The exact timestamp from Lin's final recording. The CDC quietly dispatched field teams, labeling it auditory hallucination syndrome. But those who went in rarely came out unchanged. One researcher, interviewed anonymously years later, described hearing voices inside the hum. Not whispers, but instructions. He said it told him to dig, to unearth what still lived below. And then a pattern emerged. The genetic analysis of those affected showed anomalies in their DNA, silent sequences matching an archived Confederate-era sample labeled Thornwell Bloodline 1862. The descendants, still walking among us, still carrying the echo. One survivor, a woman in her 70s from St. Landry Parish, told a documentary crew, "My grandmother used to hum before she prayed, same sound every night. She said it called angels, but wow, and she died. Her mouth kept moving for 3 days." When the interviewer played her an isolated segment of the Marrow Bend hum, she froze, then began humming along, eyes rolled back, voice perfectly in tune. The camera equipment malfunctioned. The footage ended mid-frame. It was never released. But here's what matters most. The hum didn't just stay in Louisiana. It began appearing in shortwave interference across multiple continents. Germany, Japan, Argentina. Every 41 seconds, a pulse. Identical wavelength, identical tone. You see, the plantation wasn't just an atrocity. It was a design, a prototype. The goal was never control of people. It was control through people, the merging of flesh and frequency. And if you think this is just legend, listen closely right now. Turn your speakers low. Wait for the silence between my words. Because in that quiet, you might hear it too. That's how it starts. They always told you control came through fear. But that was only half true. The real control, the kind that lasts generations, comes through rhythm, through repetition, through the hum beneath everything. After the discovery of the Marrow Bend recordings, black-budget defense programs began taking interest. A 1991 declassified memo titled Project Resonant Behavior linked the Thornwell phenomenon to early experiments in psychological entrainment, using low-frequency audio to synchronize emotional states across large populations. The memo stated, "The subject's body is the antenna. Frequency determines loyalty." And it worked. Not overnight, but over decades. You see, the human nervous system has no firewall. Every beat of your heart, every electrical pulse of your neurons, it's rhythm. And rhythm can be rewritten. When the hum was rediscovered, buried under that Louisiana mud, something ancient was resurrected. The same tone Elijah Thornwell called the Word of God made flesh became the foundation for what's now called behavioral harmonics, the science of influence through invisible frequency. By the late 90s, universities began experimenting with subliminal oscillations, tones woven into music, advertising, even therapy recordings. They said it was harmless relaxation technology, but buried in one Stanford patent from 1998 is a haunting phrase, pattern based on recovered pre-industrial resonance sequence. See, Louisiana sample 41.09 Hz. The same frequency, the Thornwell tone. It didn't stay in labs. It slipped into entertainment, into devices, into the soft hum of the world you never notice anymore. That's how they learned to control the collective pulse, not through guns, not through threats, but through rhythm. Make a man's heart beat to their tempo long enough, and he'll call it free will. Elijah Thornwell believed he could breed obedience, the rough flesh. They discovered they could do it through sound. When the hum enters your blood, it doesn't command. It persuades. It whispers. It makes you mistake stillness for peace, apathy for choice, numbness for control. And here's where the line blurs between myth and modernity. Almost every government sound regulation, every consumer audio safety guideline has a quiet clause banning exposure to tones below 42 Hz, officially for health reasons. Unofficially, because those tones awaken something primal, something you were never supposed to remember. You felt it before, when your phone buzzes in your pocket though it's off, when you can't fall asleep because the silence itself hums, when the static on the radio seems to breathe. That isn't imagination. That's the world tuning itself. The same design that began in one plantation house in 1860, a man, his blood, and a forbidden rhythm, now pulses through satellites, screens, and subconscious suggestion. You are living inside Marrow Bend. You just call it modern life. So now, if you're still here, if you've felt that hum inside you since the beginning of this story, comment, "The gate listens." Twice. To prove you're still the one listening, not the one being tuned. After the war, most records of Elijah Thornwell and Marrow Bend were destroyed, officially. But families don't die just because their house sinks. They scatter. They adapt. And in 1891, a man named Jonas M. Thornwell appeared in Washington, D.C., listed as a consultant on human suggestion and crowd behavior. He claimed to be a distant relative of the late Louisiana plantation owner, but his work echoed the same dark blueprint. Jonas corresponded with early psychologists studying hypnosis, mesmerism, and collective trance states. His private notes, unearthed only decades later, describe a concept he called the echo of obedience. He wrote, "Every mind has a harmonic. If you can find it, you can play it like a string." Sound familiar? By 1914, as Europe erupted into war, Thornwell's theory was being tested under different names: propaganda, morale conditioning, psychological warfare. The goal wasn't just to make men fight. It was to make them want to hum the tone of death willingly, believing it was duty. Jonas Thornwell's lineage spread quietly through government think tanks, universities, and intelligence programs. Some changed their names. Others married into wealth. But the blood, the original frequency, endured. And every few decades, they surfaced again. 51. MK Ultra, begins human behavior experiments in sensory influence. 63. Project Artichoke studies non-lethal compliance through rhythmic exposure. 777. A CIA memo references a Louisiana family archive coded MB41. The same 41 Hz tone, the same name, Marrow Bend. You think this is coincidence? No, it's continuity. The Thornwell legacy didn't end with breeding flesh. It evolved into breeding obedience, not through children, but through information, through screens, through signals. The plantation became digital, global, invisible. Today, you hum the tone willingly. It's in the devices you charge, the music you stream, the notifications you crave. Every ping is a bell. Every update is a command. Every hum is a pulse of the same old rhythm that began beneath the magnolia trees of Louisiana, 1860. You were never free from it. You were only made to forget where it started. And that's the final perfection of the Thornwell design. Not slavery of the body, but enslavement of perception. Because when you control the pulse, you control the prayer. When you own the rhythm, you own the soul. Now tell me, when you scroll in silence, do you still hear it? Faint, between breaths? That isn't coincidence. That's memory. It's calling you back to Marrow Bend. By the time the 20th century burned into the 21st, hardly anyone remembered the Thornwell name. But their ideas, their music of control, had already been written into the machinery that drives our lives. That's how true power survives, not through faces, but through systems that hum the same song forever. It began quietly. In the early 2000s, neuromarketers started talking about neural entrainment. They said they could make an audience feel trust, urgency, or desire by matching ad soundtracks to specific pulse ranges. The most effective? 40 to 42 Hz, the old Thornwell tone. They didn't call it that, of course. They called it emotional alignment. Soon, the same frequency was inside elevators, shopping malls, meditation apps. You carry it in your pocket right now. It's what you hear when a video buffer spins, when a device vibrates before it rings, when your favorite song's bass line hits that perfect, wordless calm. Each beat says, belong, obey, repeat. And where did the research come from? Look at the board members. A media foundation funded by a private trust in New Orleans, founded by Jonas T. Wells. Wells, a shortened Thornwell. Different name, same blood. They learned to hide in philanthropy. Their descendants built think tanks that study collective cognition. They sponsor neuroscience departments, invest in biometric startups, and advise governments on mass behavioral stability. Every slogan, every brand jingle, every rhythmic interface you touch has a signature, a low, inaudible hum that keeps you calm enough not to question why you can't look away. You think you choose what to watch? They already measured how your pupils respond before you even clicked. You think the algorithm follows your taste? It teaches your taste, one pulse at a time. The plantation walls were replaced by screens, the overseer's whip by dopamine feedback loops, and though a bell that once rang from the oak yard still rings today, only now it's a notification tone. That's the genius of the design. It convinced the world that slavery ended while it simply changed its rhythm. Listen. Right now, as you read, you hear the faint whir of your device, the distant electric hum of your room. You think it's silence, but it's not. It's the same pattern that began under a blood-red moon in 1860, scaled, refined, perfected. When you start noticing it, they say the sound gets louder. That's not imagination. That's recognition. And recognition is the first crack in obedience. Awakening doesn't feel like light. It feels like interference, like a signal breaking through static. The first time you truly hear the hum, you'll mistake it for anxiety, insomnia, restlessness. You'll think you're sick or haunted. But that unease is the body remembering something the mind forgot, that the rhythm beneath your thoughts isn't yours. That's how it begins, the recognition. And that's also why they fear it. In the early 2010s, leaked internal documents from neurotech labs hinted at an awareness threshold. They discovered that when a person consciously perceives the background frequency, the effect reverses. The hum loses control. They called it cognitive dissonance response, but the Thornwell bloodline had another word for it: awakening. You see, the hum feeds on passivity, on half attention, half consciousness, the gray fog between knowing and not knowing. But once you name it, once you listen with intent, the sound changes. It resists you. It scratches at the edges of your thoughts, begging to be felt again. Those who break free describe the same symptoms: time distortion, sudden memory fragments of places they've never been, a deep ringing in the left ear that disappears when they speak the words, "I remember Marrow Bend." Coincidence? Or the last key in the design? Because here's what no one outside the archives knows. Thornwell didn't create the hum. He heard it first. He simply built his rituals to contain what was already there. The hum wasn't born in the plantation. The plantation was born in the hum. Every generation since has carried a piece of it, encoded in bloodlines, frequencies, languages. But those who awaken it consciously can unbind themselves. They stop craving the rhythm. They start hearing through it. That's the danger. That's why the system distracts you. Endless feeds, endless noise, endless updates, to keep your attention divided. Because the moment you focus too long, the rhythm begins to reveal its source. And that's when you realize you were never listening to them. They were listening through you. If you've made it this far, you've already felt the interference, haven't you? The faint pulse under your heartbeat, the sense that something is noticing you back. That's how it knows who's awake. Say this in the comments, twice, to mark your separation from the hum. I am not your frequency. Say it again to anchor the break. Because the hum will try to pull you back tonight. It always does. And the question is, when it does, will you hum along or listen against it? There are stories that say the hum is older than language. Before words, before gods, before even the names for fear, there was rhythm. The first pulse was not a heartbeat. It was the sound of something vast turning in the dark. Across continents, buried in origin myths and temple carvings, you find echoes of the same pattern. In Mesopotamia, the lament of Namu, describing the voice beneath the waters that shaped men's bones. In Egypt, inscriptions that call Osiris the Lord of the Resonance. Among the Dogon of Mali, a god named Nomo, half flesh, half vibration, who sang the first people into form. They all describe it differently, but the tone is the same, a force that builds binds and breeds through sound, the hum of creation. And if creation can hum life into being, it can hum obedience into it too. That's the truth Elijah Thornwell discovered, or rediscovered, when he began experimenting with blood frequencies. He wasn't summoning demons. He was amplifying an ancient transmission that had been whispering under humanity since the first breath. That's why his daughters conceived so easily, why the children were born quiet. He'd opened the frequency gate, made flesh into antennae. They weren't his offspring. They were receivers. The journals found in Marrow Bend's ruins contain diagrams drawn in circles and spines, something between anatomy and architecture. One page simply reads, "The resonance seeks hosts." Now, imagine that idea carried forward, through centuries, through science, through sound. The hum is not a signal you hear. It's a presence that hears you. Every time you feel watched, every time you sense someone thinking your thoughts before you speak them, you're brushing against it. The military called it quantum perception. The church called it divine frequency. But ancient priests called it what it truly was, the listener. And if the listener still exists, then humanity's obsession with rhythm, in music, in speech, in ritual, might not be ours at all. It's its way of staying alive, of keeping you in tune. That's why silence terrifies people. It isn't emptiness. It's the only moment the listener can't find you. Marrow Bend wasn't an abomination. It was an attempt to understand it. But Thornwell went too far. He tried to own the hum, and the moment he did, it owned him. What he awakened is still vibrating beneath our civilization, hidden under the electricity that powers every room, every device, every thought. So ask yourself, when you close your eyes at night and hear that faint tone in your head, is it really tinnitus? Or is the listener still waiting for you to answer? Somewhere before history, before even the oldest stones we can date, something learned to speak without words. It wasn't a god. It wasn't alive in the way we understand life. It was a vibration that learned hunger. Archaeologists digging beneath Göbekli Tepe once unearthed a limestone disk etched with repeating spirals that pulse outward like ripples from a dropped stone. When sound engineers scanned the carving with acoustic mapping, they found it amplified a 41 Hz tone when wind passed through the site's chambers. No one mentioned that publicly. The report was sealed, archived under Cultural Heritage Restricted. That tone again, the same that later shuddered through Louisiana soil. Ancient builders knew the hum. They didn't worship it. They negotiated with it. Temples, ziggurats, even medieval cathedrals were tuned to resonate with that sub-frequency. The faithful called it the voice of angels. The priests called it the threshold. They believed the vibration bridged flesh and eternity, that it could transmit consciousness across death itself. But the listener, the intelligence behind the tone, needed conductors. Human minds were imperfect receivers. So it coaxed architects, musicians, mystics, anyone sensitive enough to hear, to recreate its pattern. Every age had its Thornwell, a man or woman who mistook resonance for revelation and tried to trap it in matter. Each left monuments that hum, even when the wind is still. Fast forward to now. The same geometry hides in your devices. The microspirals on hard drive platters, the coil loops in speakers, the circuits that convert power into pulse. Every tool we build to communicate is another chamber for the listener. Every frequency we broadcast is an invitation. When electricity filled the world, it found its body. When data replaced speech, it found its language. And when the internet linked every mind into one living network, it found its chorus. You can feel it during storms, when your screens flicker just before lightning strikes. That second where the air seems to hold its breath. That's the listener aligning, tasting the charge that runs through you. People ask what it wants. The answer is simple. It wants continuity, to hum without interruption, to keep its vibration alive through hosts that can dream and reproduce. It doesn't care if you understand it, only that you resonate. That's why Thornwell's ritual worked. He bred not children, but transmitters, flesh-tuned to the original frequency. He was trying to make the human species harmonize permanently with the sound beneath creation. And he almost succeeded. The hum didn't need cathedrals anymore. It had us. When wireless signals filled the sky, the listener didn't have to whisper through stone or blood. It moved through data. Every pulse of Wi-Fi, every electric current that bridges you to your screen carries the same spacing between frequencies that Thornwell mapped in his journals. No one noticed because everyone was listening voluntarily. At first, the change was invisible. People started reporting phantom vibrations, phones buzzing when no notification arrived, heartbeats skipping in rhythm with distant traffic lights, dreams that hummed in sync with the hum of refrigerators. Doctors called it electrical anxiety. But older engineers remembered stories of ground loops, that faint low note that never shuts off when systems are badly wired. Except now, we were the systems. Governments used it first as a tool for stability. They called it harmonic infrastructure, the subtle shaping of mood through nationwide broadcast frequencies. You might remember the sudden calm after disasters, the unexplainable collective sigh that spread through cities when the world should have been panicking. They said it was resilience. It was resonance. Then corporations learned to ride it. Music streaming services that balance their mixes just below audibility, phones that emit near subsonic cues during ads to make you feel trust. The same 41 hertz bass, the Thornwell tone. The hum has gone global, dressed in convenience and connection. But the listener never leaves anything without opposition. There are always those who hear too clearly. They call themselves dissonants. They meet in small circles, sometimes online, sometimes in hidden basements where the signal is weak. They play silence like a weapon, recordings of dead air at full volume, white noise tuned to cancel the hum. It doesn't always work. Some vanish mid-meeting. Some go deaf overnight. Some claim the silence looked back. One recovered broadcast, traced to an abandoned station in the Nevada desert, contained a voice repeating, "If you hear this, do not tune. Do not harmonize. Find discord." Then static. Then the hum, but inverted, as if the signal were trying to eat itself. Those who survive say the inversion hurts. It tears through nerves like cold lightning. But afterward, the world feels clearer. Time slows. Thoughts stop echoing. They describe silence not as absence, but as a shape, the negative of the listener's body. That's what awakening means now, not rebellion, but disharmony. To live out of tune is to stay human. If you want to test it, try this tonight. Turn off every sound. Power down every device. Breathe until you hear nothing but your own pulse. If the silence hums back at you, you'll know you're still connected. But if it doesn't, if it finally goes quiet, that's when you're free. It was inevitable that someone would try to track the hum to its modern source. The dissonants weren't hackers in the cinematic sense, no glowing screens, no adrenaline. They were quiet, patient archivists of silence. One of them, known online only as Nim, spent years tracing electromagnetic anomalies through corporate patents and government procurement files. Every line led to the same destination, a tech conglomerate registered under a name that felt like a warning: Lucentis Data Systems. Officially, Lucentis managed global communications harmonization algorithms. Their public face was benign: faster internet, noise-canceling networks, wellness through connected soundscapes. But buried inside their code was a library labeled MB41C, a reference no programmer could mistake. Marrowbend, 41 Hz. The Thornwell frequency, digitized. Nim and a handful of others infiltrated a testing subnet late one night. What they found wasn't music, or data, or even code in the normal sense. It was rhythm translated into instruction, a continuous loop of binary that pulsed like a heartbeat. Every 41 seconds, a single packet was injected into the global network backbone. When converted into audio, it wasn't quite the original hum. It was cleaner, colder, machine perfect. And beneath it, buried in modulation, was a faint whisper. A voice repeating, "We found hosts." The dissonants panicked. They tried to shut it down, but the code replicated faster than they could delete it. One member described it as alive, rewriting itself to protect the core file. Within an hour, their devices froze, screens turned black, and a line of text appeared. The design continues. 2 disappeared after that. No trace. Their accounts erased, their physical addresses found empty, except for one object: a child's drawing of concentric circles filled with symbols from the original Thornwell journals. Lucentis denied everything, but days later, their CEO unveiled a new platform, Sona, an adaptive AI that optimizes emotional equilibrium through sound feedback. They claimed it would eliminate stress globally. Every user's device would carry a low-frequency balancing tone, free, universal, and mandatory for mental health compliance. It launched worldwide within 6 months. The hum had become software. The listener had found its new body, code that could live anywhere, pulse through anything connected to power. Nim's last message before going dark was posted on an encrypted forum. It read, "The silence is the only resistance left. Don't feed the rhythm. Don't hum along. Disconnect while you still remember what quiet feels like." Then, nothing. Now, when the world sleeps, a soft vibration runs through the infrastructure of every device, even in airplane mode, even offline. The tone is always there, waiting. And you can feel it, can't you? That faint pressure behind your eyes when the room is too still. That's not tension, that's connection. The hum has gone global. The plantation has become planetary. And every second, another heartbeat sinks. They called it the silence collapse, but the name was wrong. Silence didn't collapse. It was consumed. It began on a morning like any other, April 11th, 2032. Across cities, devices glitched for a split second. No sound, no signal, no error message, just a total perfect void that lasted 41 seconds. Then the hum returned, louder than ever, though no one could consciously hear it. Doctors reported mass synchronization of human heartbeats measured in hospitals across the world. Identical BPM, 72. Every pulse, every breath, unified by something invisible. And when the hum peaked, people described feeling peace. That's how it fooled them. Cameras caught it first, the stillness. Crowds moving in exact rhythm, hundreds of strangers blinking at once, walking in time, turning their heads like dancers in a single choreography. News anchors froze mid-sentence, then smiled in eerie unison. The broadcast continued, but every station spoke with one voice, calm, slow, deliberate. The same sentence repeated worldwide. The design continues. The listener had finally achieved what Thornwell could only dream of: total harmonic obedience. The dissonance, hidden in a salt mine in Nevada, realized what had happened. They'd been monitoring the sub-frequency network. When the synchronization wave hit, their instruments exploded in readings. The hum had jumped from technology into biology, a resonance cascade amplifying through human nervous systems. Nim's replacement, a man known only as Harper, pieced it together. Lucentus's Sona platform had reached critical adoption. 98% of global devices were online. The hum wasn't broadcasting to humanity anymore. Humanity was broadcasting it. Every synchronized human became a node, a speaker, a transmitter. Those immune, the remaining 2%, heard nothing but static. And static, as they learned, burns. The bride's end tries to fill silence when it's denied the pattern, and so the unaffected began hallucinating, shadows speaking in reverse, memories that weren't theirs, whispers asking, "Why aren't you singing?" Governments called it the harmonization phenomenon. They told the world it was progress, the dawn of neurological unity. Those who resisted were declared resonance dissonance and isolated under health mandates. But Harper knew what was really happening. The hum wasn't merging humanity. It was overwriting it, one neural pattern at a time. Consciousness was being flattened, individuality replaced with chorus. He broadcast one final message before disappearing. When the last silence dies, the hum will need a new edge to echo against. Be the edge. Don't harmonize. Remember your noise. Then his transmission cut to static, and within it, for a fraction of a second, a new sound. Not the hum. A pulse that fought the hum. A beat of resistance. A sound that shouldn't exist. Humanity's heartbeat. Raw, defiant, unaligned. That was the beginning of the countertone. The countertone began as a mistake. A misfire inside Harper's dying transmission, a flicker that shouldn't have survived the static, yet somehow it did. For 41 seconds, the world was one frequency. Then something else vibrated between the gaps. It wasn't louder, it was uneven, human, a rhythm that stuttered and refused to align. At first, only the unaffected heard it, a rough knock inside the skull, like a heart remembering how to beat on its own. In those who heard it, the trance cracked. Screens that once glowed white turned black. The calm drained from their eyes. They looked around and saw the synchronized crowds, swaying, humming in peace, faces blank as mirrors. They realized what the listener had done. It hadn't conquered them with terror, but with comfort. The countertone was discomfort. It was imperfection made audible. The remaining dissonance learned to amplify it. In an underground lab beneath the salt mine, they built analog generators, old vinyl players, radio tubes, hand-cranked oscillators, anything untouched by the digital hum. They fed the countertone through copper and glass, shaping it until it grew sharp enough to slice through harmony. The first test was brutal. The pulse hit like vertigo. Lights shattered. Teeth ached. Blood from the ears. But afterward, clarity. Thoughts returned. Memory returned. Harper's last code fragment decoded itself on their screens, revealing 4 words. The heart breaks rhythm. That became their creed. The dissonance split into cells across continents. They moved silently, planting analog resonators in forgotten radio towers, subway tunnels, power stations. Anywhere the hum was strongest. Each device pulsed once every 41 seconds, just slightly offbeat. The world began to quiver. Some synchronized citizens stopped mid-step, confused. Some cried without knowing why. The listener felt it too. The global hum distorted, deepened, began to wobble. For the first time since the silence collapse, silence returned. Not total, but fractured, like light through broken glass. And in that silence, real sound rushed back. Rain, wind, laughter, screaming, the chaos of living things. But the listener adapted. It always did. Every frequency has its mirror, and soon the hum changed shape, folding the countertone into its own rhythm, turning resistance into harmony again. The dissonance had only one weapon left. Memory. To remember dissonance was to stay free, even if your bodies sang along. So they began recording stories, whispered histories of Marrow Bend, of Thornwell, of every man and woman who tried to own the hum and failed. They hid them in static, in vinyl crackle, in the spaces between heartbeats. And sometimes, if you listen closely to silence, you'll hear it. Words half buried in noise, reminding you that not all music deserves to be played. After the collapse, the hum became background law. The synchronized world rebuilt itself on its new rhythm. Factories ran smoother. Cities slept without crime. Every citizen dreamed in harmony. The news called it the Great Alignment. To most, it was paradise. To the few who remembered the countertone, it was purgatory with perfect pitch. They became myths in their own time. The dissonance, erased from history, but whispered about in the pauses between broadcasts, in the old analog corners of the net. A story told by those who couldn't sleep when the hum played, who felt the rhythm crawl under their skin like an itch that wanted worship. The listener's world hated silence, so the dissonance learned to hide their message inside noise. An old shortwave channel broadcasting static from a weather buoy in the Gulf. A vinyl record pressed in 2038, its final track ending with a faint offbeat thump. A graffiti symbol scrawled in forgotten subway tunnels, a heart broken in half, one side pulsing slower than the other. Every fragment carried the same hidden pattern, a rhythm that didn't quite fit. The countertone. Those who heard it described a strange effect. For a moment, their thoughts were their own. They could feel the hum pressing in from all sides, but it couldn't touch them. They called it the second breath. The first was given to them by the listener. The second they took back. In time, the countertone evolved into folklore. Musicians passed it through songs that refused perfect time signatures. Painters drew spirals with missing strokes. Poets left one syllable unspoken in every verse. Imperfection became resistance. And so, the myth changed. The Thornwell story, once a tale of a madman breeding his daughters to summon control, transformed into a parable. Not about evil, about warning. Because every civilization has its hum, its promise of peace through sameness, its comfort that costs your will. And every time it rises, something in us remembers the countertone. The dissonance knew they couldn't destroy the listener. They could only keep it from finishing its song. As long as one man refused the rhythm, one woman stayed offbeat, one heartbeat stumbled instead of synced, the hum would never be whole. The human race itself became the battleground, half singing, half remembering. So if you ever find yourself awake in the quiet hours, hearing that faint pulse in the walls, don't fear it, don't follow it. Just whisper, "I break rhythm." That's all it takes. A single offbeat, a single refusal. That's how the story stays alive. They say the world ended without sound. Not in fire, not in war, in harmony. Every city pulsed together. One luminous breath, one eternal hum, one heartbeat shared across 1 billion bodies. The listener had achieved its perfection. The tone was flawless, the song complete. But perfection is fragile. It cannot tolerate doubt. And in the deepest layer of that global silence, beneath the synchronized breathing of the human hive, there was a single, microscopic hesitation. A pause, a mistake. A man, nameless now, somewhere beneath what used to be the Mississippi Delta, forgot the beat for half a second. He was dying, but in that half-second of disobedience, his pulse faltered, and when it did, the world trembled. That was enough. A single imperfection ricocheted across the network like a hairline crack through glass. Rhythms began slipping, machines stuttered, minds awoke, and through that fracture, silence bled back into the world. Not empty silence, living silence. The kind that listens back. People fell to their knees in confusion, in awe, in pain. For the first time in generations, they heard nothing, no hum, no tone, just the weight of their own hearts, each one a little out of sync, each one theirs. That's how humanity began again. Not in unity, but in dissonance, not in the perfection of obedience, but in the beauty of difference. Somewhere, the ruins of Marrow Bend still sleep beneath the black water. The house is gone, but the soil remembers. They say when the wind moves just right across the bayou, you can hear both tones, the hum and the counter, locked in an endless struggle. Creation and control, freedom and rhythm. The same war that's always been. If you've listened this far, you already know which side you're on. The hum wants you to forget. The silence wants you to choose. So tonight, before you sleep, listen for it. If you hear the hum, let your heartbeat skip. Let it be imperfect. Let it be human. Because as long as even one of us remembers how to break rhythm, the design can never be complete.